Hello, I'm John. I'm sat on board Corrick in Oban. Elizabeth's reading her book, having fully recovered from her little infection. We've just finished 2 weeks sailing the Small Isles and the West Coast of Mull, and I thought I'd talk about those two things together because actually they aren't obvious companions, but they work really well. I hope you enjoy this video. Thank you very much for watching. One of the things about the Small Isles and the West Coast of Mull is they're separate pilot books, they're separate sections, and they don't sort of run together, but actually our journey from the Small Isles down to the West Coast was good, and doing it the other way would be equally as much fun, but very different. The Small Isles to the north of Ardnamurchan Point and the West Coast of Mull clearly to the south really do represent two very different sailing type of areas. Small Isles, clearly group of islands quite close together, most of the shelter on the eastern side. The West Coast of Mull, on the other hand, a little bit more dispersed, much less shelter, certainly a lot of open lochs to the west, and so they do represent two very different styles of sailing area. As we came up from Tobermory out to Col, and then northwards to Muck, and then basically disappeared off the sort of radar for the Small Isles by heading into Loch Moidart and then up, and then through up to Kyle and north from there. But when we left Loch Boisdale nearly a month later, we had the opportunity to visit Canna, which I would highly recommend. And then after we did the south coast of Skye and then went into Mallaig for showers and provisions, we then got the chance to do Rum and Egg as well. Again, very different and both very lovely places. We then headed gently south, missed Col this time, although it was an option to go and certainly do some of the other bays on the side of Col, but we then headed down to Mull Ferry and based ourselves there for a day or two. We had always wanted to revisit Staffa. It's a pretty amazing place, and any time I've done it in the past, we've had enough crew to leave somebody on the boat. That very much not recommended, although it was quite benign when we were there. So we parked the boat up for the day and let somebody else do the driving, which was fine. We then came round through the Sound of Iona, which is very lovely. Did think about stopping for a short time. I didn't think we would get into Tinker's Hole. I thought it would be absolutely busy, but it wasn't. So we spent a couple of hours, very nice lunch there, enjoying the tranquility on our own in there. And then we had an urge and a need to be in Oban. So we came round past the Torridon Rocks and up, anchoring near Pooldoran, but not quite in it. Again, that unlike Tinker's Hole, which was completely free, we could see the masts in Pooldoran, and we counted 7 or 8 boats in there, and thought that might be a bit of a squeeze. Sorry, we counted those masts in the morning, having not gone in the middle of the night, and it turned out to have been a good decision. And then up into Oban, but very much enjoyed both the Small Isles in its disjointed form and doing the West Coast of Mull. Might even go back during this trip if the weather sorts itself, because as we head south from here, there may be an option to pop back up again. But we'll see how it goes. Well, the point of Ardnamurchan has a bit of a reputation, but on both occasions when we did it, it looked a bit like this, not much more than a 3. But on the way north, we then called into Muck. Muck is the smallest of the islands and really very benign little anchorage here. And we wandered ashore. We were able to buy a little bit of fresh seafood from these boats who are here and visit their little community hub. A really nice building with a little bit of a museum in there as well, showing a little bit of the history, but it looked really nicely set up. It wasn't till about a month later that we arrived in Canna and again managed to get ashore for some very lovely strolls. Lots of, probably about, I think about 30 people live on Canna, maybe a bit more, but you can look over Rum from there, and this was the Puffin Trail that we were on. After our visit into Maleg, we then visited Rum. Rum has this very lovely telephone box that made me think of Local Hero. But as always, around the jetty there seem to be discarded anchors, perhaps as a warning about the weather. Rum has this Kinloch Castle, which was unfortunately shut for visitors when we were there, but it appears to be a bit of a museum and a hostel at the same time. Really very, very out of character for the islands, but well worth a visit. We then headed down towards Egg, and we managed to get serenaded with some bagpipes at sunset. At this stage, Elizabeth was starting to feel a little bit unwell, so we didn't actually go ashore, but it looked jolly pleasant. One of the things we did see was the coastline as we left with this enormous, it's really staggering rock formation, but also in one of the bays, this is a very large steel boat that has managed to take to the ground because they have a lifting keel. Very envious. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning, and we have just got away from Egg. I'm sorry to report that Elizabeth isn't feeling terribly well, so she's sleeping this one out, but it's a very, very mellow, light, northwesterly, maybe tiny bit of westerly, which should be just lovely for getting us round Ardnamurchan Point. It sort of marks a major milestone, I guess, in terms of getting out of the small isles, which have been just terrific, but also our return from the Outer Hebrides. I'm feeling slightly melancholy about the whole thing, but it couldn't be a better day for doing it. Nice breeze, 3 knots at the moment over the ground, and I think that will pick up as I get out of the lee of Egg, so we'll see. As we were navigating round the bottom of Egg, I noticed that the heading on the Fluxgate compass here, 170-ish, and this one here on the fallback at 210, very different. And that manifests itself where your heading appears to be well off where you're steering. And that was because of a magnetic anomaly in this place. And what I needed to do was to simply restart the Fluxgate compass and do 2 spins, and then it sorted itself out. I'm happy to report that as we came out of the lee of the Isle of Egg, the wind filled in very much as predicted, and we're seeing a really lovely solid 10, 11, sometimes 12 knots of breeze, apparent right on the beam. So 5.5, occasionally 6 knots over the ground. It's all looking good. And we appear to have another boat that we can measure our progress against. One of the things about the west coast of Mull and the small isles is there is a bit of a lack of harbours, but there is a new facility just gone in at Mull Ferry, and this is me walking down the pontoon. There's room for 5 or 6 boats there, entrance either from the north or from the south, and this is the building work going up. It looks like it's going to be really very smart. Heads, showers, laundry and a little bit of an office, but it won't probably be ready, I guess, until October time. But I think it'll make Ulva Ferry much more attractive, even if it is slightly tide bound. Well, we took a day trip and we went to Staffa on somebody else's boat.
Which was quite good.
Which is quite good, although it's extremely settled at the moment.
We're not sure if we'd have got Corrick into the cave.
No.
No. Lovely place, very peaceful, lots of tourists.
Yes, but
I was saying that to John, further south we're coming now, we're seeing more and more people.
Yeah, more and more. As we approached in the boat, the driver of the boat managed to get us really close in, but we were then able to step ashore and wander into the cave itself, which is really rather fabulous. And as you can see here, the geology of the place is rather staggering. But we also managed to see a fair bit of wildlife. There were seals, all sorts of birds, including a couple of little puffins who just disappeared as I got my camera out. It was fairly breezy when we left Ulva Ferry, but we pulled into Carsegg Bay, and as you can see here, it flattens right out inside the bay with a little bit of a westerly breeze, but it disappeared as soon as we got in behind inside the rocks. And the following morning, it was absolutely mill pond. I managed to get the drone up and take a few shots here. We were absolutely on our own. There might have been a boat maybe a mile either side of us, but it was a very lovely spot indeed to spend the night. But the wind that we had the night before had, as you can see, completely dropped off, and it didn't, slightly uncharacteristically, it didn't reappear in the morning as it so often does. So we ended up with a fair little motor on our hands, but I enjoyed getting these shots. For what it's worth, there wasn't much in the way of bird life around, and I'm getting very cautious about flying the drone when there are birds around. They don't seem to like it very much, and I'm keen not to disturb them. We ended up motoring down towards the Sound of Iona. Every now and again there was a little whiff of breeze, and we tried to get the sails up and get going, but it never really lasted for much more than about 5 or 10 minutes. In the end, motoring through the Sound of Iona was probably not a bad shout on account of the fact that it's ever so slightly shallow. But yeah, and we had a tiny bit of adverse tide, but it was a pleasant enough trip through. As I said earlier, I was expecting to be able to stick our noses into Tinker's Hole and then be daunted by the number of people there, but there actually was nobody there at all, so we put the anchor down and spent 4 or 5 hours there. It was really rather lovely. But the weather was due to pipe up a little bit and come in from the east, so I was keen to get away. So just around about 4 or 5 o'clock, maybe a little bit later than that, we motored out of Tinker's Hole in order to pick up a gentle southeasterly breeze in anticipation of slightly stronger breeze coming in the following couple of days. But we managed to break the back of the 30-mile journey from Tinker's Hole back over towards the mainland. We anchored at midnight in Arden Capel Bay and then made our way up Kerrera Sound in towards Oban the next day. Again, it'd gone a little bit light, as it always seems to do first thing in the morning around here, but it was a very pleasant passage up the Sound. We've arrived in Oban, and that's all very lovely, but The wind's a little bit, but the berth that we've been given is going to be something of a nightmare to get out of unless we're really careful. Let me just show. We'd gone bows first into this berth, B26, and with the prop walk going to port astern and the wind from the east, I was immediately nervous about our exit. So we're in this berth here, which is nice, but it opens up onto this square here, and with the wind from the east or the northeast as we have it, there's very little chance of getting out of here. And if another boat goes in here while we're sorting things out, then we'll have a lot of difficulty getting out. So I'm going to spin the boat around here so that we're facing outwards for going. Elizabeth says she thinks to us knows what's going on, but this is what's going to happen. We have this line here which goes round the bow and onto the cleat. That will be the new head rope. This line here, which is currently our head rope, will go aft to there. What is the existing stern rope will be eased off and the stern will swing out. We'll then pull the bow along the jetty and Elizabeth will pull in on this fluid white rope, which will bring the stern back in here. So we'll be secured on this new rope, which is our new head rope, and the white rope. This technique of turning the boat at rest I've used a few times, and it took the weight off my mind for getting out. In the end it possibly didn't need to do it because the wind dropped very slightly, but I slept better knowing that we were facing the right way. Key here is to always work with the elements. In this case it was absolutely the wind, and we let the wind blow the stern out. We controlled the bow head to wind, got the boat facing straight off. We always had the boat secured, and then we were able to use a winch to just gently wind the stern back into the pontoon. 2 or 3, maybe even 4 ropes always connected at the same time, and always in a position where we could hold the boat steady if we got a bit of a rap. We had a very nice time in Oban. We spent a day in the Oban Marina on Kerala and walked around there and visited their community shop, which was very lovely. We then made our way over to the North Pier Transit Marina, which we stayed in for a couple of days whilst family visited, and we basically had 3 or 4 days of touring around Oban and enjoying the many restaurants and bars there. And then, because you're only allowed to stay 3 nights in the North Pier and our family weren't disappearing till the following day, we popped over to the community moorings and they were super helpful. Yeah, it was good. And Oban is it's got a nice vibe to it. I'm sort of regretting bypassing it on the way up, but glad we've done it now. And then by the time we got to the end of that, we were in need of some quietness, and so we have come over to Loch Don, where we spent last night, and it was averagely windy, but then dropped overnight. And ideally, as you can see in the background, it has been mill pond since about midnight. Really very lovely. Only question now, where to go next? I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Thank you very much for watching.